I'm going to skip the leave approved by default for now and move on to the rounding unit. Now if you want to round your clockings to the closest, let's say 5, 10 or 15 minutes, you need to enter the rounding unit in the global settings. During the processing of the hours, all your employee clockings will be rounded. Lunch clockings, in, outs, every single one. Rounding can be overridden on employee level as well. So if we just use an example quickly of an employee with an override, the global settings is set to 15 minutes on this clock. But for this specific employee, this employee's rounding has been overridden and it's been set to 1 minute. So as you can see there, it's not rounded at all, just to the closest minute. Now rounding is deemed to be half-half. So in other words, if we look at this picture, if your closest quarter of an hour, so from the midpoint to the closest quarter of an hour. Let's go back to our global settings. And next up is our running totals. And this is mostly used for working flexi time. So if we go back and we have a look at our employee daily hours, you will see a column called variance. And the variance is the difference between the employee's expected hours and their worked hours. So if running totals are enabled, the variance for the day will be added to the running total of the previous day. If we can just make this a bit more simple, and we go to Ryan's screen here. So for the previous day, Ryan's total were already in the negative. He's got a positive value of 1 hour and 5 minutes which has been added, and his total for this day is now a negative 1 hour. And as he works the overtime, it will be shown in your variance column and it will be added to your running total. So at the end of this week, he's got a positive value of 15 minutes in his running total. Please note, if you do any overrides on your daily hours or changes to an employee's clockings when running totals are enabled, it will trigger a reprocess of their daily hours from the date on which you're making the changes up to the current date. You can also override the running totals on employee level. In other words, you can just use it for some employees that's working flexi time, while the others it will be disabled on. So at this point, we've had a look at all the options in the employee schedules and in the global settings. And you should now understand the basic processing rules and be able to set up your employee schedules. Now let's move on to the more advanced settings and the leave processing. Thresholds. If you want to set up a minimum number of hours that has been worked in a time category before any time is allocated, then you need to go and add a time category threshold. And to set a threshold, you need to go to the advanced global settings, this link there, and the tab over here. As an example, say an employee must work at least 15 minutes of overtime before they will qualify for it. Or if they come in early and you do not want the hours reflected in your extra time column until they've been early for, let's say, at least an hour, then you need to set the values in here. Give overtime from 15 minutes onwards. You will need to set this overtime category to 14 minutes. If you set it to 15 minutes, it will only allocate overtime after 15 minutes. And the same for your extra time category. So 59 minutes if you want to see anything over an hour. Again, this is a global setting. So in other words, it will apply to all your employees, and this specifically, your time category thresholds, cannot be overridden on employee level. Okay, next I'm going to have a look at leave. Now leave plays an important role to calculate your employee hours correctly. Let's go have a look at our leave types. And by default, there are 5 leave types: the paid, sick, flexi, unpaid, and other. And I've added an extra one there at the bottom. Now, if you change or add a new leave type, you need to specify whether it's a paid leave type. In other words, is it going to assign the employee's expected hours or not? And should it affect your variance? If this is not ticked, then it will see your hours, your leave hours as worked hours. If your leave type is paid, you can also select to which category your hours will be allocated to. When you add leave, you can add your leave record as a percentage of the employee's expected hours. You can also actually add more than 100%. So if you put in 200% there, the employer will receive their expected hours times 2. Now, things to remember around leave. Very important, leave records may not overlap at all. Another thing, if your leave record falls on a public holiday hours are earned and not leave hours. This setting will determine whether the leave record is automatically marked as approved when added. So if I just go back to leave and go insert, because it's enabled, this little tick mark will be ticked when you insert a leave record. If that function is not enabled, the employee's supervisor would need to come in, change the leave record, mark it as approved, and then they can also enter a comment under the approval tab. Now, to see the leave in action for an employee who's got a schedule, let's go to employee 8. This employee did clock off for the day and then went home sick. You can see the normal hours have been allocated as well as sick leave hours. Next up is our public holidays. Now, your public holiday dates must be entered in this window here, processing holidays. These public holidays are seen as paid holidays. So the employee will receive their expected hours in the holiday column regardless of whether they worked or not. And again, if I can show you an example, we had a holiday on the 16th of June, which was called Youth Day. You can see the employees with employee schedules and expected hours received their 8 hours for the day under holiday, or 6.5 hours. Employees that worked, which coincidentally these employees do not have employee schedules assigned to their name, it will still allocate their worked hours to the normal Saturday, Sunday, etc. category depending on the schedule for that day. You can also reassign time category hours. As an example, after your extra hours have been calculated, in other words, all the time worked before your expected start time, you can go and reassign those hours and add it to, for example, your normal time category or your overtime category. Again, this is something that's going to apply to all your employees, and it cannot be overridden on employee level. And to show you where to do that, this is under Global Settings, Advanced, General. Assign hours to the following time categories. So if you want to move your extra hours to normal or overtime, you select it from there. So anything worked before your expected start time will now be added to your overtime category. Of course, if you make changes after your hours have been processed, you will need to go and reprocess your hours from the date onwards. Now, in the next firmware release, we make provision for that. So if we go back to Global Settings, you'll see that there is something called Reprocess From Date. And you can set your date there to reprocess all the hours from the date that you specify onwards. Now, once you've set up the processing rules, you can go and rename your time categories and or your weekday names. And that is done under Processing Global Translations. Now, please note, this is very important. Changing your time category names is not going to change the processing rules for those time categories. You may just want to change the descriptions to maybe match your payroll pay codes. So for example, you want to maybe change this to just OT 1.5 as an example. And maybe you just want to change your weekday names to just display the first 3 digits. So overtime is now changed to OT 1.5. So again, just to reiterate, changing the descriptions do not change the meaning of these categories. They will still do exactly the same thing even if you change the descriptions. We've gone through our settings for our daily hours calculations, and we get to the point where we want to see our payroll hours. I'm going to assume that my payroll is only 7 days long, and the payroll hours are actually just the sum of the daily hours for your selected period. You can also do payroll balancing on your payroll hours. So just again as an example, if we go to payroll hours, and as you can see, the from date and the to date is 1 day, and it gives you a total for your payroll hours for that specific day. Now if we change our date for this week or for that week, this is our payroll hours for this period. Again, it's just a sum of the daily hours for each of these employees from this date to this date. Now the payroll balancing, you can see payroll balancing has been applied to some of our employees. This employee has been set to only work 32.5 hours per week. So anything in excess goes to overtime 1.5 there. This employee has been set to 40 hours with time has been moved to overtime 1.5. This employee does not have a payroll balancing entry assigned to his name. Now the payroll balancing is set up under the setup menu, payroll exports. And as you can see, I've already have 2 payroll exports in there. If you have different balancing rules for different groups of employees, for example 40 hours a week or 32.5 hours a week, you need to create a separate payroll export entry for each of those rules. And you can create these payroll extracts even if you do not export to a payroll, but you still want to apply your payroll balancing. So as an example, if we go and look at our 40 hours per week, you have an option to balance extra time, normal time, your overtime, and Saturday time. Now I'm not interested in balancing my extra time, so I'll move on to normal time. And my total for my payroll period, I want to set to 40 hours. And these 40 hours are made up of course, my normal time, and I've selected Saturday, Sunday, holiday, and my leave types. So if the total hours in these columns that I've selected are less than the total in my balance hours total, I need to fill that, and I want to fill it with hours in my overtime column. You can also select any of the others and it will fill it in order. So it will first move from the overtime column into normal, then maybe let's say you've selected Sunday time as sort of a double time, and then you want to move your Sunday time in there. If it's the other way around and these total hours exceeds the 40 hours, the excess hours will be sent to whatever category you select here. In my case, I've selected the overtime 1.5 column. Now once you've set up your payroll extracts, you need to assign these payroll exports or the balancing rules to your employees. And to do that, you go to your employees and you go change on them, and you'll see there is an entry called payroll type, and you can select the one that you wish to use from your drop down menu there. Once you've selected that and you view your payroll hours, it immediately applies those hours to your payroll total. If the CS TimeClock is not actually sufficient for your specific use, you do have an option to use other software. We've got TNA software available, more powerful processing features and additional other user features.